I think that with the huge breakthrough we've just seen in neural networks, we may come to realize that we need a completely different approach to raising children, educating school children and university students, and even to how we position ourselves in society.
Today, we want to explore capacity and the strengths and weaknesses of both individuals and society. Because it's fascinating to ask whether the same laws apply here on both the micro and macro levels.
It's a very complex subject, but also a very relevant one. If we're moving toward global processes that will transform all of humanity, we need to expand our capacity for everything that's happening. People think from their own limited positions, and those limitations make them unwilling to accept new things or develop at the speed and in the direction that matter today. So today we'll break down what happens from childhood all the way through society, although it will overlap a lot with what we've already discussed in previous episodes.
I actually like that even when I ask you the same questions, you always answer differently. So please just go wherever it takes you. We've already looked at childhood from different angles, from parental love to growing up, and the stages every child has to pass through on the way to adulthood. But looking at things now, it seems to me that childhood has somehow gotten a little lost in our society.
Listen, no matter what people say about children today, very little faith is actually placed in them. They're taught too intensely and forced into the confines of information and the beliefs embedded in it. What's most interesting is the shock we're seeing among astronomers right now. Looking at the images Hubble sent back, they realize that everything they've been telling us for decades is complete nonsense. The entire theory of the universe has to be rebuilt because it doesn't match the facts we now have. The reason is that there was too little information, and they tried to generalize everything from that limited data. And it turned out to be false. It's like touching one object in a dark room and judging everything else in the room by the one thing you felt. Exactly. That's why I see the recent breakthrough in neural networks as enormous. The speed and volume of information they can process may lead us to realize that we need a completely different approach to raising children, educating school children and university students, and even to how we position ourselves in society. Unfortunately, our current system worked well and helped previous generations develop. But today, it's coming apart at the seams and deteriorating.
It's declined for years. Still, I'd like to see some positive trends by now. But there are no reforms. Instead, a certain ideology is imposed, or children are simply burdened with tons of knowledge they don't want to study. They can ask GPT now and learn more in a second than...
And above all, more accurate, up-to-date information than in textbooks approved many years ago.
It may not be more accurate. After all, 83% of what AI produces is called hallucination, because
As of today,
it generalizes a lot.
And we have to understand that it thinks like the average person. The average person lies, is mistaken, or distorts information 83% of the time. AI reflects who we are. Since the quantum world works here 100%, we can say ChatGPT may deceive us. But when we look at social workers, tax officials, politicians, or school teachers, We don't always find that they're telling the truth either, even when it isn't simply an honest mistake. Sometimes people say something false because they're mistaken or received inaccurate information. Other times, they do it deliberately with malicious intent. As a rule, this comes from weakness. People are trapped within very narrow beliefs and are afraid to step beyond them because they haven't devoted the energy needed to overcome those limits and transform themselves.
But then, how do an organization or a government hold on to power, maintain control, and keep the focus on their own interests? Is that needed? Is it necessary? Does it reflect the interests of the citizens involved? Or is imposing it always an act of aggression?
Listen, it's always aggression, always. Even when I was reading Seth, he said that all novelty is aggression. All novelty is aggression, meaning,
But there's the aggression of novelty, and then there's dogmatism imposed over generations. That's aggression too.
same tool.
Against novelty, keeping it from getting through.
The tool is the same. The old defends aggressively, the new pushes in aggressively. The question is, what level of aggression are we talking about? If the new is too aggressive, more than the 12% we discussed, we'll kill the old, while the new never gets born. Or we'll face very serious transformations, where it isn't clear at what point the transition happens. That's why we need a smooth, steady force that applies pressure and brings about change. When we jump abruptly from one level to another, we inevitably fall back so we can go through what we didn't have time to experience. Otherwise, there's no foundation. So we need to prepare for a long, intense process of transformation. How do we judge its effectiveness? When the leaders, scientists, politicians, and economists leave their spheres of influence, the trends they set remain.
Explain what you mean by a foundation. A foundation is what has been built up genetically or through certain events and life experiences. It gives us a point of support from which we take actions that produce results.
Well, you answered your own?
How much?
Your question already contained the answer.
But how much should the foundation itself change? Does it need fixing?
Of course it changes. Take Sweden. They decided to invest in music and in teaching children to play instruments and sing. They ran that program, and within a short time, everything musical coming out of Sweden became incredibly good. Why? Quantity turns into quality. But what's really remarkable is the idea of a genetic level. When a mother and father have certain abilities, those abilities are passed on to their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The key is that it becomes stable across several generations when something useful keeps progressing. So yes, we carry deep elements laid down by our ancestors thousands of years ago, but they're basic and merely sustain our physical nature. We need to rely instead on the processes that are changing right now. If we rely too heavily on what our ancestors had, our progress may turn into the collapse of our civilization. Unfortunately, these frantic swings from one direction to another show that the priority isn't value, but manipulation. It isn't the genuine processes that bring life, love, and development, but substitutes designed to give people false information and preserve the current paradigm for a little longer. Unfortunately, professors do it, politicians do it, and even employees who are simply too lazy to do anything do it. A striking example, we watched Kalmanovsky, where they gave GPT fingerprints and asked it to determine whether they belong to.
Well, it's not necessarily ChatGPT.
When they gave the information to AI and it produced a very clear answer, the leading forensic experts called it complete nonsense and dismissed the research outright. Then the scientific community evaluated it using not 2,000, but 100,000 cases and said it worked. They found firm patterns. Fingerprints could identify relatives, all 10 fingers matched the same person, and nationality and race could be determined from them. Only then did the experts agree. What if they had stopped with the forensic experts who said it was nonsense? The reason was that they didn't want the hassle of studying more. They had done well, reached a certain level, and then started to stagnate. Unfortunately, this kind of stagnation is everywhere and affects everyone. So, and this is a bold statement, we need to change our approach everywhere, in medicine, child rearing, education, economics, and politics. What's interesting is that the changes won't be radical. They'll simply make adjustments consistent with humanity and sustainability. Because what I keep seeing is a swing from one extreme to the other. And this comes from people who care more about holding on to their seat, position, or title than from people who genuinely care about others. The principle is simple. When people lack capacity, they don't understand that what we do to others comes back to us. The basic biblical principle is, the measure you use will be measured back to you. When a person becomes closed off and selfish, they block their own development and opportunities. Even if they manage to hold on to their position or financial situation in one area, everything else in their life will suffer considerably.